Martina, tell me about the situation with regard to Brexit as it stands at present and how it affects us here in Ireland.
Well, Sinn Féin has been on a diplomatic offensive since the referendum and before. There's a lot of not just goodwill in Europe, but the MEPs and the different institutions are prepared to afford the North designated special status or some kind of special status within the EU.
Different from the rest of the UK.
Yes, because people recognise in Europe that Brexit is incompatible with the Good Friday Agreement. When we look at, for instance, what Theresa May and others are saying about a hard border, a hard Brexit is going to mean a hard border. And in her recent statement, her manifesto statement of last week even, she has said that no deal is better than a bad deal. So that effectively, and that actually means that we are going to be propelled into a situation where you'd have custom checks in this island, across this island, so that the 23,000 people that cross the border every day to work or to study, the thousands of commuters that cross the border on a daily basis would all be subjected to some degree of prevention trying to get to their point. But more importantly, for businesses, they would have tariffs, which means they would have a cost to pay to ferry goods and services across this island.
I see that, and most people I think see that as what's going to happen or could happen. Is there any way out of that? Because the fact of the matter is the South is within the EU, we will not be within the EU here in the North, so you're going to have some kind of border, no?
No, you shouldn't feel that we should have to have some kind of a border, because there are 25 overseas countries and territories within the EU and all of them have special status. So what we are saying, we have put a case, Sinn Féin has presented a case for the North to remain within the EU, that we should have designated special status within the EU, and that means access to single market, access to the custom union, access to funding, and you don't have a situation where you have part of Ireland in the EU and part of Ireland out of the EU, and it prevents any kind of emerging of custom controls. If we don't have that, then it has to be Irish unity.
Yeah, but can we, will not be the same as the South, even you do have special status, will still be outside the EU, would that be correct?
Well, what the EU has afforded for other places is that whilst they will continue to have that access, that this is a situation of maintaining the status quo as it is for the island of Ireland, but in respect of the constitutional position of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
Now, as an Irish Republican, I want to see the country reunited, and I believe that is going to be the essential direction of travel. But what the EU is saying, that they do not want to damage the peace process here. They value the peace process, they've paid into it in peace funding, peace 1, peace 2, peace 3 and peace 4. Over 22 years, over 21 years, there has been almost 2 billion allocated for one programme alone on peace, and there's been 22,000 projects that have benefited from that. There have been 110,000 people now have qualifications as a consequence of the peace programme and reconciliation that wouldn't have had qualifications.
So it's very precious, there's no doubt about it. Europe has contributed enormously. The question is, how will it work in practice? I mean, if you are you saying that there won't really be, that goods and people will be able to move seamlessly as they do at present from north to south if we get special status?
Yeah, but we are saying that the 4 freedoms, and Europe is very clear about this, that you have to have the freedom of movement, the freedom of goods and services, that all of the 4 freedoms in Europe has to be respected. And what we are saying in our case that we are presenting for designated special status, that we have got a Good Friday Agreement that affords the Irish government as a co-guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement, so we have linked to a member state, and that member state can be the place through which funding, for instance, is channeled through. So whether it's peace funding, whether it's interreg funding, whether it's the other funding streams, and to preserve the integrity of the single market, so that we do not have a situation where you have 2 different regulatory standards on this island. How will we do that with regards to food safety? That you would have one regulatory standard in the south and another one. All of that would confront and challenge the Good Friday Agreement about the harmonisation and implementation bodies and areas of cooperation of people working together.
So there's goodwill from Europe in terms of that, you feel?
More than goodwill.
And do you think there'll be opposition to that from the UK?
Well, there are 516 MEPs who voted in the European Parliament to preserve the Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts, to ensure there be no hardening of the border in Ireland, and to support this as a case for special and unique circumstances for Ireland. What we need to recognise is that within this island, that it is the position of the Dáil. They have voted on it. They believe that there should be a case for designated special status, and in the Assembly, the majority of political parties support the case for designated special status. This cannot be left to just the British government itself alone to decide what is going to happen in Ireland when you have a Good Friday Agreement that affords both governments to be co-guarantors of that agreement. Because let's be very clear, the Assembly is a legislative assembly. It cannot make a law. It can't make any laws unless they are in compliant with the EU. So Tony Blair suggested that there should be a rewriting or a renegotiation of the Good Friday Agreement. Be very clear. That is a no-go area, and we are not going to be standing by, idly by, and watching our peace process and our political process be damaged, that we are some kind of collateral damage, because let's face it, the British government doesn't give a damn about the people here or the implications that Brexit's going to have in Ireland, particularly for the North of Ireland.
Important question. Would you have the support of unionism for what you've described?
Well, I can only go by the last vote that was taken on Brexit, and there was 56% of the people here who voted. And within that, obviously, there were people within the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community. One only has to look at the different constituencies to affirm the fact that Unionists have supported remaining in the EU.
But when it comes to the crunch, if they think that, well, first of all, you have the DUP opposed to in favour of Brexit.
Well,
therefore, presumably they'd be. There's a contradiction there, isn't there?
They got a lot of dark money in
order
to firm up that position.
Is there a contradiction there? That on the one hand they say they are in favour of Brexit, but they're also in favour of a seamless border.
Well, this is it, and that's where I think the contradictions and the tensions are there for the DUP to try and explain. Because the farmers and the length and breadth, particularly of the North, 87% of their single farm payment comes from Europe. CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy, is the sole competency of Europe, not a member state. And if anybody believes the 3.5 billion that we get from Europe, it's going to find its way coming from the British Exchequer.
Oh, Theresa May said she'd do it for 2 years, said she would do it to 2020.
Well, it'll take to 2019 for this to happen anyway, and Theresa May has got the bill to pay. Now, there's big controversy about what that bill is, but what I am saying is at this moment in time, Brexit and the Brexit negotiations has been divided into 3 strands. The first strand has been dealt with at the moment, rights, then finance, and then Ireland. Within this right strand, 1.8 million people on the north of Ireland are afforded the right to Irish passports. Being Irish passports means you're EU citizens. So within the right strand, you also have the Irish government needs to adopt the case of designated special status and needs to ensure within this strand that those of us who have Irish passports, and whether you're an Irish passport holder or not, you're still afforded the right to have an Irish passport, that your rights as an EU citizen is protected. That has to account for something. We can't be second-class EU citizens. We haven't moved to a third country. We live in Ireland. We are part of a contested space. The British government has withdrew the Government of Ireland Act. The Irish government amended Articles 2 and 3. We were told that the constitutional position of Ireland would stay as it was unless the people agreed to it and consented. But we did not consent to this.